Hey again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and today I'm enjoying a part of my hobby that I do just for fun and not so much as a business. You know, I propagate a lot of plants for sale, but these are succulents, and I'm just doing these as an indoor project over the winter while I can plug away at the different types of propagation on succulents. And these succulents can be divided and propagated a number of different ways. And what I kind of like about it, even though there are specialists in succulents, is that once you know the basics of propagation for sedum and echeveria and grapto and all of them, you actually don't need to know which species they are. You just have to look at the way they grow and decide from there to try plucking off a leaf here or plucking off a stem there, or dividing them like I'll do on this one here to see if you can get more plants out of it. So let me show you some of the methods that I've used to do that and some of the rules I've followed and some of the rules that I've broken as well. So these are just succulents I've divided out from mixed planters, and you can see that all on their own, they start thinking about propagation right away. So I'm going to zoom into the bottom of this pot here, and I think what you'll see is that just from regular handling, some of these leaves will drop off very, very easily. And when they drop to the bottom of the pot, this is what they do, is they automatically start thinking about rooting and setting up new shoots. And so this should give you some clue that this isn't such a hard thing to do if you just pull off leaves, leave them on the top of a soil surface. They will actually start that work all on their own. And like I say, this one here, but I've also got another one right here, a third one right here. That one's starting to send roots, so I've pulled that out and disturbed it a little bit. But it is really not hard to get leaf cuttings off of a succulent. And I want to show you as well on something like this. Now, that was the first one was from leaves. This one actually does a decent job of setting its stems down and then rooting from the stems. So it actually, the stems will droop down into the soil there, and as they do, they'll start rooting all along the length of the stem. And in this case, you can see that it's actually starting to root on its own, and it's become sort of semi-detached in that way. So that's another easy way of making a cutting. Now, a third way that you can talk about propagating these succulents is, and I'll show you on this one here, you can see on the left here, there's a head. On the right here, there's another head. And if I rotate it this way, you can see that there's a third head on there. That's another way that you can look at trying to propagate these, is to actually divide out those heads into their different clumps. Doing that division step can be a little messy, so bear with me here while I get some of the soil off of this so I can see how to try to divide those three different heads. I feel a little bit of space between all three of them. The question is, can I get roots on each one of them? So if I do a little carve in right here where I feel the division line, this one comes off beautifully with some roots intact. So that's what I'm after. Pull that up here a little bit so you can see. Next, let's look at these ones here. Now, if I just pull very gently between the two, maybe I can even do it by hand, which it looks like I've done successfully here. This one here also has roots attached. And the third one, after I break it out, has roots as well. So from that, I have three different, probably echeveria is the species. I have three different echeveria plants from one, and they actually needed that division anyway. If I left them all clumped in that same pot there, they'll just grow out all on top of each other, and you won't have an attractive plant anymore. So separating it out like that is kind of a necessary step, and the side effect is that you get more plants. And back to the topic of leaf propagation, the removal of the leaves to stick them is relatively easy, and all you're looking to do is just grab a leaf along the stem here and give it a pull to the side or a slight twist until it comes away cleanly. And I'll try to get you a close-up of this cutting here so you can see that the end came away naturally, right at its abscission point from the plant. Now, I know some of the real succulent people will emphasize this part here, where after you've harvested some leaves for cuttings, that you lay them out in a dry place and let them callus a bit on the ends where you've plucked them off. And that's fine too. I'm not here to contradict that. I would just say that I like to skip the middleman and go straight into putting them on top of soil. And in most cases, unless I think you have a very sensitive succulent, one that's just not good at handling moisture directly after that harvesting step, that should work out fine. And let me show you how they come out for me. So to the step of sticking those leaves, here's a tray that I've made up, and the soil I've used here is just basic composted bark. I've seen people use peat moss and coir as well, and I'm sure any of them will work fine as long as you manage your moisture levels just fine. You actually can't get too much moisture in a tray this size. And in terms of sticking them, I've seen people do this method here where they just lay them out flat on top, and that's fine too. It sort of combines that callusing stage, and then once it develops the little rootlets there, it'll pull it down. I sort of skip the middleman myself, just for the sake of not having to handle them too much, and I usually just heel them in just slightly like that, just with one end of the cutting sort of pushed into or having contact with the soil, but not buried in any way that's going to keep it wet for very long. And then once these all root out, obviously they start sending their shoots here as well. So you keep an eye out for that, because actually what will happen is these old leaves will be pulled down as they root, and it'll root firmly, and then you'll see the new shoots coming up. And these ones I just laid directly into a flat of a 50 cell tray. So each of those cells on this flat had one cutting in it, and now, because it's a couple months later, you can see that that initial cutting is still on there in this case, but that the plant has rooted and it's gone ahead and sent up these brand new shoots. And so let me see, at the risk of looking cruel on camera, let me pull that right out and show you what it has become. So there it is. From the base of that leaf cutting, there's lots of new roots and a bunch of new shoots as well. Let's see if I can get that to come into focus there. So growing climate-wise, you can see here that outside, boy, it is buried in snow. One of my greenhouses, you can see how high or deep the snow is on the side of that. But inside here, I've kept it a nice, balmy 20 degrees Celsius, which they will take. And I think that's around, 68 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And they would even prefer a little bit higher than that. I think they'd take up to about 25 degrees Celsius for really optimal rooting temperatures, which would make it probably about 78 degrees Fahrenheit. You may have to correct me on that. And what I have inside here as well, we obviously have bright indirect sunlight here, but I've got also some LED lights, a variety of LED lights, just to speed along the rooting as well. Another great way of doing propagation, especially on things like sedum, which tend to develop these central stalks and go straight up. This one here was taken from a cutting, and I stuck it in soil, and then it made its own stalk, its own shoot up the center here. And what I did is I pinched that off right here, stuck that in some soil, and hopefully you can see that this has developed its own set of roots as well. So now when this one roots and sends its own central shoot, I can go ahead and make another cutting. And in contrast to what I propagate out in my greenhouse, which requires frequent misting to keep its moisture in, these probably only take a misting a couple times a week. So it's really, really easy to root these. Well, that pretty much sums up my foray into succulents. I'll be using them once they're rooted and large to decorate this room here, plus other areas around the house, because they have to move off those benches so I can have room for my spring seeding, which is coming up surprisingly fast. All right, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, please leave those below the video.